way or bad way, right? At the
Yeah.
same time. Yeah, that we can potentially sabotage ourselves or actually motivate ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think this is kind of a bittersweet iteration of I happened to me because it's a lot has come out of it. I mean, it's great, but it's also like, yeah, I happened to me. Okay, we're live this hour, joined by Luivette Resto. We're really thrilled. This is part of the DAW signature speaker series. The DAW is a not-for-profit based in Pomona, focused on being an equitable space where we're both an art gallery and an art lab, and we're here, to serve the, people of Pomona and the world if we can. So, Luivette, I really thank you for joining us this hour. Can you open with a poem?
Sure. This one's called Yamaya's Pantoum. When I visited the ocean, she told me I was strong as her currents, unpredictable like the tides. She told me brujas on blood moon nights, unpredictable like the tides, gathered by her recursive feet with a handful of silver coins, because brujas know how to worship her coastline like an altar and stand by her recursive feet, as a Perugian tide allows a kiss. To worship her coastline like an altar full of intention, while gray waves move like a plena as the tide allows a kiss, entropically move from me to you. With full intention, waves glide across our feet as her answers whisper from me to you, strong as her currents.
Powerful. So Louis, you've been writing for many years. You're the author of several books, and you are a master of the fine arts. Can you can you tell us a little bit? Can you tell us a little bit about how you obtained said mastery, and what was that process like?
Said mastery. Said mastery was at UMass Amherst, and it was honestly completely by chance. I think you know the story too a little bit, but I had no intention of going into an MFA program. That I didn't even know, to be honest with you, MFA programs existed when I was an undergrad, and it wasn't until someone else that I knew was getting her master's in fiction at Emerson College, and said, "Hey, there's these programs that you can go to, these graduate programs where you can actually refine like your craft, and you can either go into fiction or poetry." And obviously I was leaning towards poetry, and I had never heard of this stuff. And I was already headed to law school, and I already had taken my LSATs. I already was applying to law schools, and that was kind of the trajectory of where I was going. And then, life happened, and conversations in a library, which I found to be very, in hindsight, kind of hokey and a little bit, but someone asked me, if you really wanted to be happy, how do you see yourself? And I said, well, if I really had my druthers, if I could just completely dictate an art, create and be the true architect of my life, I would be a writer, and I would write poetry. And, they were very much like, well, that's what you got to do. And that really changed my mind. And then that's when I decided to abandon being a lawyer, and then researching MFA programs for like a year. So I took like a gap year. And then in that year, I worked kind of as a social worker. And then I started researching, and I came across a few MFA programs at the time. And I knew I was only going to stay in the East Coast. I was not really looking towards the West. I think UC Irvine was the only place I had looked at. And UMass Amherst was the only school that accepted me. But it was not a bad one to be accepted by. And then I was given an opportunity to have a fellowship there, because then I had to think about how I was going to pay for it. And I was completely on my own at the age of 21. And I got a fellowship to teach, composition writing. And that was enough for them to waive my tuition. And I was able to, have my tuition waived. And for 3 years, I was at UMass Amherst for 3 years after that. So it wasn't smooth sailing, I feel. I think it was definitely the universe placing certain people in my life to make me think about it. And while I was there, I had the absolute honor of working with Martina Espada, who happened to be who was teaching there not in the graduate program, but actually in the undergrad program. but still he took me under his wing, and then I was able to take a couple of graduate level classes as independent studies with him. So that I think where the mastery came from, or the attempted mastery.
So the series is being followed by a wide cross section of people who tune in at times, and not everyone is involved in the world of poetry. Can you explain to our audience just who Martin Espada is and why that is so significant?
Martin Espada is significant because he was even dubbed by, I believe, Sandra Cisneros as the Neruda of our generation. I mean, which is the highest compliment one of the highest compliments you can be given as a writer, if someone is going to compare your voice to Pablo Neruda, which I feel like everyone knows, like you're talking about, not everybody knows about poetry, but I think Neruda is one of those writers that almost everybody knows. For whatever reason, if it's weddings or whatever the case may be. But, Martin's writing is political, and it's unapologetically political. He will never, I think he's been on Democracy Now! A few times, very vocal about anything going on political, especially right now. So to work with him was a true honor. And also the fact that he was Boricua, Puerto Rican, raised in Brooklyn. And so for me, when I first came across his writing as an undergrad, I'll be honest with you, I was like 20, I think. And that was the first time I had ever read poetry by a Puerto Rican, ever. And that really, and Elena Viramontes was my teacher at the time, and she was the one that placed him as part of the curriculum. And that changed me forever. Like, I remember being 20, I think, and just being completely enthralled in this one book of poetry. And then I wanted to read everything he ever wrote. And then completely by chance, I think the universe always knew this. He came to campus when I was in my gap year. He came to campus to read. The Latino Graduate Coalition brought him to be a guest speaker, and I happened to have dinner with him. I was like, the grad coalition invited me along, even though I wasn't going to Cornell anymore, but I was friends with them, and they said, yeah, come through. We're going to have like a little dinner with him. It's going to be the Latino Grad Coalition. It's going to be the Afro-Am Coalition, the Asian American Coalition. Everybody's going to go, going to have dinner with him, and before the big reading. And I was invited, and I got a chance to sit at the big table with this guy that I was fangirling. I'll be honest with you. I was like a fucking fangirl at the, just beside myself, that the guy that I read at 20 is sitting across from me. And honestly speaking, he was so aloof. And he and I laugh about it because he just was, I was so intimidated, and he seemed so unapproachable, and I didn't want to talk to him at dinner. And I think I said a couple of words to him. And then what happened at dinner, I'll never forget this, is that we were at this Italian restaurant in Ithaca, and one of the Latino grad students, and I think you would appreciate this story, he was having his dinner, and Cornell was going to pay for the dinner. So we were just more bread, more pasta, because we're not going to pick up the tab.
But they never pay for the libations. That's the part that's
they will never pay for the alcohol.
You have to order the fanciest of cheeses or something. You have to get it in somehow. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And we were completely indulgent. We were like, oh, I was in that gap year working as a social worker. I was fucking poor as hell. And everybody was a graduate student. Everybody was on a severe budget. So the fact that a university was going to cover this great dinner, we were just super excited. But anyway, one of our, Angel, one of our friends, all of a sudden this big ruckus started to happen at the end of the table. He found the butt of a cigarette in his pasta. Okay. And Angel was not letting this go. He was talking to the waiter and was like, there is a cigarette butt in my pasta. What the heck is this? I'm not paying for this. What's going on in the kitchen? Blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, there's some other, patrons there who were finally kind of taking notice. And they said, you people make a lot of noise when you come into restaurants. And it was very obvious that we were the only Black and brown Asian table in this all white establishment. And it was a pretty one of the better Italian restaurants in Ithaca. And, you know, Martin's background, that he's a lawyer. So I think people forget that too, that his background as a lawyer, he was a tenant lawyer. So we all kind of looked at him at one point and was like, what should we do? This is escalating pretty quickly here. And the wait staff was not trying to help out. And so Martin just looked at all of us. He's like, you know, you could just walk out. And so we all got up. It was like 20 of us, walked out of a restaurant, did not pay the tab. You know, it was like, this is unacceptable to be treated this way at a restaurant. And also the fact that the other patrons were talking to us this way, and the wait staff and the restaurant staff was not even trying to support us. And this was a really big tab. I mean, we were 20 heads, and it was like, you're going to make a lot of money. We're going to be your biggest bill today. And this is how you treat us. And it was very obvious why we were being treated this way. And so he was like, you guys we can just walk out. And we walked out of this restaurant, and then we were all like in the parking lot and like talking like, this is what we did. I can't believe it. And then Martin was like, being the lawyer, he was like, you know, the cops are going to be called. We should probably not all be congregating in the parking lot.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we all like scattered into our like,
yeah.
It's such a great story. Like we all kind of scattered, but then he was the main guest, right? He was the guest of honor. And so like, I think they stuffed him in this tercel, right? And like, he's in this tercel. And we ended up going to campus and having like pizza and wings or something. It was the most unextravagant dinner we could have had with him.
Did Cornell pay for that as well?
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
We did not pay for it. And so what was funny about that story, like fast forward like a year and a half later, I'm at UMass Amherst, and you know, hanging out there it was maybe like a month before school started, and I'm in the department, the building where the English department is going to be or is, and he happens to be in the lobby talking to the guy who interviewed me for the job that I got. And I almost walked away, and a part of me was like, nah, don't be so chicken, like go back and say hi to the guy. Because again, I was completely fangirling and scared out of my mind. Yeah. And then I went over to him and I'm like, hey, I don't think you remember me, but I was at Cornell, remember that big fiasco? And he was like, oh yeah, we walked out. And he goes, you guys weren't that bright. You guys just wanted to hang out in the parking lot for a while. And so he did remember. And then he said, what are you doing here anyway? And I said, well, I got into the MFA program. And I thought at the time that he was actually a teacher there, and that maybe some way that he read my work, and maybe he was kind of like the voice that allowed me to be in this program. And he was extremely honest. He was like, you know that I have nothing to do with the graduate program. I teach in the undergraduate program. And he said, so if you got in, that's completely like, I had nothing to do with it. But he said, but he knew he had some tension with the department. And he said, but if you want to study with me, he opened up and said, like, you know, that if I wanted to work with him, I could. And even though technically he was not part of the graduate program, he took me under his wing for 3 years. And Martin just really, like, again, it went from like knowing his work at the age of 20 from a very remote space and completely, you know, loving his work. And I told him, I said, you know, when I read your work, I saw myself, Brooklyn, Puerto Rican, I'm from the Bronx, and to see my language, specifically the Spanglish of being Puerto Rican in a poem, really made a huge impact in my life. And then to study with him for 3 years, it was just life-changing. And I know for a fact that when people read my work, they can see bits of him in there, because there's no way you can't.
Right. So the MFA program, the MFA life in general, it's not all wine and roses. It's not all dining and dashing with Martina Espada. There are other elements. I've talked to a few people so far, and they've described, it's come up a few times.
It's brutal.
Within the MFA program, there's a tendency for people to be asked to kind of ethnicize their work, or like, how do I know these characters are Puerto Rican? Make them do something Puerto Rican, make them do something, you know, Mexican, make them do something Black, make them do something Dominican, whatever, what have you. Did you experience that as well in the MFA program?
Oh, absolutely. It was brutal. MFA program is at least for me at UMass was, you know, I think, like, again, I made the experience what it is for me, but I had to curate that. I'll be honest with you. I had to curate my experience at UMass Amherst. UMass, the department was not going to work with me, if that makes sense. I was the only person of color in my year. And since like I said, the program is a 3-year program. So I noticed very quickly that they let one person of color every year. So I was when I was a first year, I was the only one for my first year. Then when I looked at the second year students, Yago Cura, which I think you know Yago was the representative for his second year. And then in the third year, there was somebody else. Don Lundy, who is an amazing poet, went through UMass Amherst. So she was there when I was there. I think she was a third year. And I quickly learned that there was just not very many of us. And in the poetry department and then in the fiction department, right? So when you combine this together, there was like, maybe there was 6 of us total. But how I was treated more than anything else is not about ethnicizing my poetry. It was more about, and you know this, I got told by James Tate, there's no place for bilingualism in poetry. And I was told that in a writing workshop. And I was the only one bringing in poetry that had to deal with Spanish and English. So when he made this kind of blanket statement, I was the only person that it applied to. And that was like my first semester. And I really wanted to leave and I wanted to drop out. I was like, I'm not putting up with this shit for another 2.5 years. This is how I have to be. Like, this is uncomfortable. I was angry. I went to my dean's office and I was really upset and I really wanted to leave. And it was his encouragement to say, no, you're not going to leave. You're here for a reason. You got in, you're going to fucking graduate and you're going to make them, you're going to really make a stance here. And you're not going to apologize for writing in 2 different languages. Fuck them. Write more in Spanish. Write it. Keep doing it. And I did. And I mean, to be honest with you, they're not the worldliest people who I went to. I mean, again, other than Yago and Don and some other folks. I remember there was a girl named Maya who, when she found out that I was from the Bronx, I swear to God, she went up to me. She was like, "Oh, do you know Maria Rodriguez from the Bronx?" And I looked at her, I'm like, you've got to be joking, right? Maria Rodriguez is probably the most common, like there's like 50 billion of them in one block. Like, you got to be joking. But again, it was that kind of disconnect and that I unfortunately was subjected to. And, but I didn't have to ethnicize my shit, but people definitely, when it was time to critique it, some of my classmates were not the kindest, and they were kind of, I remember one guy who said to me that he didn't like my font choice. And I looked at him and I was like, you kidding me? Like, what about the poem itself? Like, what are your thoughts about the poem? Give me some feedback. I'm paying for this shit.
Right.
And, and he wanted to focus on my dumbass because I chose Comic Sans that day. Mm-hmm. Big whoop. I just felt like doing that. And he just wanted to focus on the damn font. So I actually, I stepped to him after class. Mm-hmm. I stepped to him in the hallway and I was like, I'm paying for this shit. Look, I don't like you. You don't like me. But you know what? We're in this class to give each other critique. And you are going to give me what I paid for. You're going to put away all your politics and all your preferences and whether you like me or not. You're going to put that shit to the side because I have to put that shit to the side. When you bring a poem to the table, I have to look at it and, and help you out. That's why we're here. So yeah, MFA school was brutal. It was not, you definitely had to have tough skin to get through it. And I know some people definitely didn't finish.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was hard. It was not easy.
So for those, again, this is a wide cross section of people. So just as we asked you to talk a little bit about Martin Espada, can you tell us a little bit about the infamous and notorious racist James Tate?
James Tate, was the...
You did it to yourself, James. Anyways, go on.
Well, he's dead now. So, but James was the prize pony of that MFA program at the time because he was a Pulitzer Prize winning poet. He got, I think was the Lost Pilot. That's what he won the Pulitzer for. And, everybody, again, that was the biggest selling point for the MFA program at UMass Amherst at the time. Like, oh, look, we have James Tate. I had never heard of the guy, honestly. that's not really why I went there. I went there for, honestly, I like the fact that it was a 3-year program. I appreciated the rigor of it. I didn't really look at the professors, if that makes sense. And I know that seems kind of like backwards, but being in class with him, you know, he had the reputation of being a drunk. He had the reputation of being a bit of a womanizer back in his heyday, I think, because he had been such a fixture at UMass Amherst. But I mean, you could tell that he was phoning it in, and in hindsight, you could tell he was just doing this for the paycheck. By the time we got there, he was going to get paid by the university no matter what the fuck he did. So the fact that he had to show up once a week and hang out with a bunch of graduate students for like 3 hours and give them feedback, you know, that was an easy A for me, but that was also like an easy paycheck for him. And he also, I think I also took class. And the oddity is that I could have chosen to, you have to do you have to do 6 workshops, 6 poetry workshops. And I did 2 with him on purpose. Even though he was a racist and though he was an asshole, I didn't like his partner at the time, because at the time his partner at the time was Dara Ware. I don't know if you know Dara. I took a class with her. She was worse than he was. And I mean, she would go in, and the way she would critique my poetry, I was not too fond of. Like, she was brutal, and she wasn't very politically conscious and obviously culturally conscious. And versus James was more passive about his shit. Like, she was a little bit more assertive, and I didn't like that. And she was just a nut. I just didn't really like her. So when I had an option to take another poetry workshop, I was like, what's the lesser of the 2 evils? Yeah. I might as well take one with James. But James was, again, he wasn't really present. Like, he wasn't really giving the kids, I think, or us as students, or at least not to me. I think maybe he definitely had his favorites. And I think if he had a favorite, he would give him or her like all of his attention. And the rest of us, when we would bring a poem, he would be like, oh, that's great. Okay, when anybody else has anything to say, and then like move on, right? Like, I was never getting my money's worth with him. And then I had to take contemporary poetry with him because you had to take it. And he was the only teacher. And again, everybody got an A. And we all knew it because he was not going to teach anything. Like, he was teaching, the books that he chose for that semester were of former favorite students that he liked. And they had just come out with a book. So we were promoting, like, he was helping promote these new poets. And some of them were good, but you could tell that, again, he was just phoning it in. Like, it's from 3 to 6, contemporary poetry. Let's talk about line breaks. Oh, okay. Do a presentation. All right. At the end, nobody did not get an A in his class. And the university didn't do shit about it because he was their prize pony.
Right. So after running this gamut of highly expensive abuse and neglect, known as the MFA program, you emerge into the world. You publish a book of poetry. Can you speak about your first book of poetry, your first collection?
Yeah, I was with Tia Chucha Press, Luis Rodriguez, which again I would never have met if it wasn't for Martin. Again, I was a graduate student, and Martin needed to go to some poetry conference or festival out at Yale University, which wasn't that far from Amherst. He couldn't drive himself at the time, so I drove him in my little Focus. We spent a lot of time in my little Focus, by the way. We had a lot of great he's really funny. And when we went to this Yale Poetry Festival, I met Luis Rodriguez, and he was very much about, I want you to meet him because you're going to move to LA, and I really need you to connect with him, and blah, blah, blah. And he had the Chucha Press. That's how kind of it started. And so once I was done with my first book, which is a good chunk of it was my thesis defense, I submitted it to Tia Chucha Press, and Luis had it for like over a year. And you have to be patient, as you know, in this game. And after like a year of waiting, Luis chose it, and that's how, like, in 2008 was when the first book was published. And but I submitted it to Luis, honestly, I think at the tail end of 2006. So that's how it all started, to get the first book published, and then the second one was published in 2013.
Can you share with us another poem?
Can I share another poem? Sure. Absolutely. I will. Um, I'm gonna share this one. This is a relatively newish poem. It's not in any of the collections, because this really did happen. I think you heard this one before. A letter to Gus, the judgmental CVS clerk. Dear Gus, I didn't need the extra look of judgment or the 5-page receipt when I bought my Plan B pill. Yes, I had sex. No, I didn't use a condom. Yes, I enjoyed it. And yes, Gus, I will do it again and again and again. I don't think male customers get the same discernment when they buy the industrial pack of Trojans, extra thin and lubricated for her pleasure. I am tired of my body being examined and decided upon by men who couldn't find a clitoris, even if Alexa, Siri, and Google joined forces in some GPS version of Voltron. So save your visual admonishments, for I am not your Latin Mary Magdalene, although I'm sure I did shout God's name more than once. You will not side-eye me for fulfilling my sexual desires, expressing my sensuality, savoring the taste of a man's touch, satisfying my fantasies one orgasm at a time, loving my body under my own terms, sincerely an unapologetic woman.
Yeah, what can be said? In the series of interviews, I actually had a classically trained pianist, a piano player, and I asked him. He also played a few pop songs, and he played the Who's "Behind Blue Eyes." And in that lyric, either written by Roger Daltrey or Pete Townsend, they say, "My love is vengeance," right? It's every. But then he never like really actually expands upon that. Your poetry, in many senses, is a this isn't the one. This isn't a one-off. I mean, your poetry is vengeance at times. Can you speak to to how these poems come about? Poems like this one and like the one about the person on your couch or something like that. Like,
Oh, Hunt on My Couch, yeah.
So, like,
oh, I love that one. I'll read that one too. I love it.
Yeah, but we could do that. But like, can you tell us, like, what is that process like? Someone does something fucked up, and then how long does it take you to write a poem about their indiscretions and
I think you know this too, Matt, and I think any artist will admit to it, especially writers. I always forewarn people. I said, listen, like, you got to be careful what you do with writers. You really do. I feel like, we will immortalize you.
Yep.
And we can immortalize you in so many different ways. Like, right, I can immortalize you in a love poem, and I can read it aloud, and people will forever know that you moved me, and blah blah blah. Or this can happen. And so I always forewarn people. I said, you really got to be careful with us. This could go either way. There's no one road here when you are engaged with an artist or a poet. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I get really, again, going back to my graduate years, when I got really angry, Martine would say, take it to the page. When you're this upset, when I got really upset at James Tate for saying that shit about the bilingual stuff, I was so livid. I wanted to leave. And again, he was the one that said, take this anger that you have and fuel it to the page. Let that be what you use. And I forever remember that piece of advice. And so anytime I get angry, anytime that I'm trying to process a very volatile emotion, I really try to write a poem about it. And I don't know if it's any good at the time. Some of them are not very good, and some of them end up being, pretty good or decent ones. But I think for me, it's just really about processing that anger. And instead of, physically hurting somebody or making a scene, let me immortalize your stupidity. You want to say stupid shit, like, hell, I will create that metaphor and that simile, and I will personify it. I will do all the things, and you will forever be remembered for your stupidity. Let's do it. I have no issues with that. I don't know if it's vengeance. I think it's more of like, if you're going to do stupid shit in this world, you got to kind of take responsibility for it and have some accountability. And you can't be reckless with it. And if you want to be reckless, that's great. But then our job, I feel, is to then hold you accountable, right? I think our job as writers is to take what you do and you say, and then kind of put the mirror to you and be like, no, you did this. No, you said this. and this is how you made me feel, and or this is how you made a large group of people feel.
Yeah. Can you speak to what it was like to get your first book, a collection of poetry, published, and like how did you, like, what was, what came next? Like the book comes out, you have a book now, it's 2008. You gotta take the book around.
Yeah, you gotta hustle.
How'd that go?
Oh, I think the Theatrice is a really small independent press, and so Luis is a one-man show, and he was very open about that. He's like, listen, it's just me really running the show. There's only 2 books of poetry that I can publish a year. I wish I could do more, but this is all I can do. So I appreciated the honesty that he put out there. And I think when you're a publisher or an editor, that has to be really, you got to be honest with your writers and say, hey, I'm a one-person show. This is what I'm capable of doing, but then this is going to have to fall on you. And he was pretty honest about that and said, listen, hustling it and getting it out there, he said, it's going to be really on you. I can do so much, because he had his own stuff going on. He had the bookstore, he had his own writing, he had his own life, he was touring, and then he was poet laureate, obviously, of LA. So, I mean, I understood. And so the first book coming out, actually the first book also came out after my last son was born. So I had just given birth in 2008 in August, and then my book came out in November. So like all of 2009, I was trying to raise a young child with 2 other kids in tow. And then I had this other little thing that just came to life, which is the book. So a lot of it was a hustle. You have to be tireless, and you have to be dedicated and invested in your own work. If you really love your work, you're going to hustle. You know this. You do the same thing. You kind of say yes to almost everything in the beginning because you're trying to promote your book. You say yes to everything that you can, all the readings, any festivals, if anybody says, hey, yeah, you can have a part of my table to publicize your work, you're like, all right, bet, I'm there. So you have to be on it. And also like the cover art, like Martin had a person who does the cover art, but it was not Martin, sorry, Luis. And it was very collaborative. Like I had a couple of ideas, Luis had a couple of ideas. And then eventually, he said, I think this is the cover. And I went with what he said because he's the publisher and he's been around the block a few times. So yeah, it was very collaborative. It was very collaborative.
So now we've spoken a little bit about Martin. We've spoken a little bit about Luis. Both living legends, and they're like highly accomplished, opening these doors for you, and your poetry career. I kind of want to shift now a little bit to some of the doors that you've opened for others. Like it's not just a one-way thing. For a while, you were hosting La Palabra. Can you tell us about that reading series and your time as the host?
It was so much fun. I inherited it. It had kind of died out for a little bit, and then they needed someone to come in, and I said yes. And I worked with Kathy Gallegos for about 3 years, I think it was, and it was a lot of fun, and it was intimidating at the same time because, again, even though it was completely it was a volunteer position. I was responsible for having something once a month and balancing that out with regular life. But it allowed me to get to know and meet other writers and create a space for them to share their work. And then I had an opportunity to get to know them. And then that's how I met you. And I remember that. And now look at us. And so we're still friends to this day. So, I mean, I wouldn't have the relationships that I have now, I feel, if it wasn't for La Palabra. And also doing that really it cultivated a skill of organizing, right? Literary organizing, putting something together, publicizing it, doing a flyer for it, like all these are little skills here and there that are actually extremely useful, that I still do to this day. And I did that for 3 years, and it was an amazing, I love the relationship I had with Highland Park. I mean, I love Highland Park. I still go to La Palabra now, and Helena Sáenz is now doing who's the host. After I was done with it, after I realized I couldn't really do it anymore, I gave it to Karine, and she did it for a few years, and then she passed the reins to Angelina. So La Palabra has been in good hands, obviously, for the past easily 9-10 years. And it's and the energy stays the same, where it's still that space where new people can come in, or established people can come in and read their work, share their new stuff. And it's a safe space. It's a comfortable space. It's awesome. So it was a great great opportunity that kind of fell on my lap, and I said, sure, I'll try it out, and
Yeah.
it was great.
So, part of one of the goals of this whole series is actually, kind of just want to preserve some of the oral histories of some of the open mic or the open reading series that have taken place, as well as the venues that they have taken place in. So, for those not familiar, can you tell our audience a little bit about Avenue 50 and who they are and what they do?
Avenue 50 Studio in Highland Park is one of my favorite spaces to support, not just to organize and host something there, which Kathy Gallegos, who runs the place, is so open to artists, of obviously visual artists, but to all artists. Like if you're a musician, if you're a writer, if her space is available, as you know, she will loan you the space to do what, if it's a community. Like I know, for example, Jessica Ceballos Campbell, she hosts community meetings there on a regular basis to talk about the gentrification that's been going on in Highland Park. Kathy allows that to happen. She's like, here's the space. I had an idea for a woman of color reading that I wanted to do. And I hit up Kathy and she said, sure, let's look at the calendar. And so, Avenue 50 is a staple for, I think, writers of color, specifically in LA. Like it's home for many of us, I feel. Like, I don't know how many events we all hosted there at one point, because she does, and I know Kathy just doesn't, unless something big is going on, she'll work with you. She'll look at the calendar and say, hey, how about this other day instead?
Yeah.
And we need spaces like that. We need spaces that are big and rather centralized too. I like the location of it because it's Highland Park. So like, regardless of where you are in LA, you can get to it.
Yeah.
So the location is great. And what it stands for is very much aligned to the principles and values of our work. And that's very hard to find. So, yeah.
I definitely agree. I remember I had an event where I was going to be doing a kind of a poetry reading / like kind of talk with the investigative journalist Greg Palast, and the people that organized it. I guess they're not really from Highland Park, and I'm not. I don't live in Highland Park, and they just gave me an address. I put up the address, and Jessica Ceballos, she inboxed me and said, like, that's at Rent Girl. You can't do anything. You cannot put event at Rent Girl, right? And I didn't, and my initial reaction is always like to be like, I don't. And I know we have this kind of, call out culture, and it's good in some ways, but sometimes I feel like it's just like I sunk your battleship culture, and I'm like, what the, but Jessica offered the solution, like, well, bring it here, right? Let's talk to Kathy, bring it here, and so we had a gentrification free show that was not about, that didn't attach anything horrible to the event and put, cast a cloud over our heads, talking about, telling the truth and in et cetera, either in poetry or journalism at a location we had to lie about, So I want to say that Kathy and Jessica are incredible people. And Avenue 50 is a place definitely has met a lot of the poetry community.
Yeah, absolutely. And the collision of artistry happens there, right? Like Peter Woods spins a lot of music there, but then he just did something in February where he was DJing, but also they gave him the backspace, and there was a visual exhibit going on at the same time. I missed it because I was doing a poetry reading up in the Central Coast, but I love how, again, I love how the fact that if any of us have some crazy idea, that we can roll up to Kathy and say, all right, listen to me for a second. This is what I got. This is my idea. Hold up. And she'll listen to you. Yeah. And then after talking to her, she's like, okay. She's like, let's look at the calendar. Let's see what we can do here, and she'll work with you, and she really will. I don't think I've ever been told no by her. And I love this space. I bought art there. Like, honestly, that's how I got the cover to my second book, is because I saw artwork at Avenue 50. It's a beautiful space, and I'm always telling people about it to go hit it up, because it's not the LACMA, it's not the Getty, it's not going to be your typical gallery. You're going to find artwork that some of the big places are not going to want. It's too political. You're not a big enough name. Kathy just cares about, is the art fucking good? You know, what's the message? Is it good art? Who the hell cares how your name is? Because she does have some big artists that come through there. We know that. But then she has, you know, the newbie artists who are just trying to get a name out there, or who just maybe have one good solid piece that they put together, and she's going to showcase it at her silent auction. Anyway, again, I'm a huge fan, and anything that they do, if I can support them in any way, I try to.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit now? I mean, it's a nice little transition here. Can you tell us about your second book, Ascension? Tell us about the cover, and tell us about the process of publishing your second collection.
The cover came about, like I said, when I was doing La Palabra, and I came across this amazing portrait of a woman with short hair. At the time I had short hair, holding a machete, and I just thought that she looked like me, and I loved it, and I wanted to buy it, and I eventually did, you know, was able to buy it, and slowly but surely, and that became the cover of the book. But Ascension came about. I honestly didn't think a second book was in me. I thought, okay, you know, you got one and done. And I think maybe, I don't know if you ever came across that, where you're like, well, what if I have nothing to write? Like, what if I'm all depleted? What if I have no more poems in me? But then Ascension came around, and at the time it was my marriage was dissolving. So a lot of the poems had to do with the dissolution of a relationship in some way, and at the same time the empowerment of the self. And so Ascension really was, it just happened at a right time for me. And then when I was done with it, I approached Luis and I said, hey, I have the second book. I don't know if you want to take a look at it. And he did. And in 2012, he gave me the green light and said, okay, let's look into publishing it in 2013. And it did. So I was able to work with him for the second book, which is great. And it was a much easier process because we already had known each other. And it was the same thing, like, all right, give me some ideas for the cover. Let me give you my ideas, my feedback. And he was the one that ended up choosing the cover. He goes, no, this is the cover. So, so yeah, that's how the second book came to be in that sense.
Yeah. And so what was the hustle like for the second book?
The hustle was a little slightly different. Because of the first book, there was a little bit of traction, and also what was nice is that the second book debuted at AWP that year. So it gave it a little extra push.
Yeah.
So like I had never seen my book until I got to AWP Boston, and there it was at the Tia Chucha table. So I was like, oh snap, this is great. So I think it definitely helped. And the cover being so dynamic, the fact that you have the silhouette, or sorry, the profile of a woman holding a machete, and Ernesto Llerena is the artist, and that draws people's attention to it, and so that brings people to the book, and then people pick it up, and then it goes from there.
So these are both very highly significant, but again, wide cross-section people. Not everyone involved, not everyone watching will be writers or aware of fiction. So can you tell us a little bit about what AWP is and why that's so significant?
AWP, all white people.
I didn't expect that, but okay, yeah.
AWP, no, because AWP is a really, you know this too a little bit. It's a very polarizing conference, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's a very high, it's the, you know, okay, so I used to love WWF as a kid, right? So like AWP is the WrestleMania, right? It's the WrestleMania of writers, right? Like, you know, WrestleMania is the big, you know, the big to do. So yeah, for us as writers, it's our version of WrestleMania, except no one gets body slammed. We wish, and sometimes we get close, but it's kind of that, and you hate it and you love it at the same time. Like I love going because I get to see a bunch of writer friends that I don't normally get to see because everybody's all across the US and stuff. So it's like, oh, it's kind of cool. You get to see each other in these in whatever city it's in for 3 days. That's really cool. The part that people hate is just that it's a fucking 10,000 writers. It's anxiety inducing, and it's also extremely expensive. If you are not supported by a university or college as a professor or an adjunct or whatever, you have to pay out of pocket, which makes it extremely it's not very accessible. And so a lot of people don't go that I know. I didn't go this year for many reasons other than the coronavirus, but unless you're presenting, unless you get invited to be on a panel or some shit, like, or you have a book to promote, it's really, you're paying, it's going to cost you easily sometimes $8,000 to $1,000 for the whole weekend. And it's just really, it's a lot of money, and it's not very well represented. There's not a lot of writers of color there. That's why the joke is AWP stands for all white people, because it's a sea of white people there for the most part. The sprinkling of color is not really, it is just a sprinkle, because again, the accessibility, like who can afford to go there? Like who can afford to be there for 3 or 4 days in Chicago or LA or Minneapolis, wherever it's going to be, or DC, and pay for the hotel? And of course hotels go up, the prices go up. I mean, it's just so, but if you have a new book out, it is a space for you to promote your work, right? Because there's so many writers and publishers and universities there.
Yeah.
So it's very polarizing. I know people like hate it and love it at the same time. So I love it because I get to see people that I haven't seen in years. So that's always fun.
So in the world of big publishing, there was a real kind of big controversy in the last few months with the publication of a book called American Dirt. And out of that came an article that went viral by Miriam Gerba, as well as the formation of a kind of group of Dignidad Literaria. Then they went to New York and they got Macmillan at the table, and they got him kind of scared. And there was all this momentum that was building up, and you were going to be one of the panelists here in Los Angeles at Vroman's at an event. What would you have said at such an event?
Well, I think, yeah, the Dignidad Literaria stuff that, I mean, I know right now it's kind of been not halted, but I think that it definitely, we have to put a lot of stuff on pause. You know, what I wanted to say is that our voices obviously matter, and the commodification of our voices is really startling. Like, you know, American Dirt just kind of fortified what all of us have known. I mean, it's not new news, right? It wasn't new to those of us who've been here long enough to know that if it's us telling our own stories, the doors are either closed or barely open. But when you get someone, like Cummins, to tell the story of the border, a woman who identified as white, but then kind of took it back a little bit for this grandmother who I think was Puerto Rican or something like that. It was just like, now all of a sudden she had this random relative, which is not it was true.
Puerto Rican, yeah.
It was like this grandmother from one side. She was like a quarter Puerto Rican all of a sudden, which a part of me as a Puerto Rican, I was like, ooh, don't put me in there.
Do something else.
Please do something else. But the fact that Cummings was then, cherry picked, right, by Macmillan to do this. And when we had the panel with Roxane Gay and Miriam and Wendy Ortiz and Xochitl Julissa Bermejo was the moderator, and we had that at Antioch, which was standing room only. It was you were there. It was amazing panel. It was stated like, Cummins was the perfect person for Macmillan to choose. She was malleable, and that's dangerous. But again, we've known this, again, our voices being told by us, for us, is, again, the doors are open, and then you have the gatekeepers who allow maybe one or two of us in, and then after that, it's like, okay, we have enough of you. Or the fact that I think someone mentioned at the day of the panel that we were at, that said that, oh yeah, we already have a poetry book by a Salvadorian, so we can't have two of you. So that always happens too, right? Where there's this competition then starts to happen in our own community. And that's fucked up. Like, white people are not being concerned about that shit, right? No one's looking at each other in that way. But then we're pitted against each other. So what I wanted to say, if I could have that day, is to say that, you know, that our voices matter. And the way that, one of the things that definitely was said the day that we were all together at Antioch, that the way to really push back on this is to really buy each other's work. Like, it's important for us to buy each other's poetry books, fiction books, short story collections, chat books. Like, we need to buy each other's work, and in whatever way we can, and support each other. I'm a huge, I mean, I'm a producer of poetry, but I'm also a consumer of poetry. And you need to be a producer and a consumer. And if you're able, if you have an extra $10 in your pocket, and if you have that, some of us sometimes do, some of us don't, it depends on the waves. But I try to buy books. I'll get to them maybe eventually. I have a lot of books I haven't read yet, but when I get some Amazon money from these parents, you know, to say thank you for teaching their kid, I try to treat myself to a couple of new books and be like, all right, I have 5 new books now that I can get to. And I try to buy, yes, I'm looking at writers of color. But yeah, it's a hard battle. And I think what the American Dirt, you know, fiasco taught us, this whole, the scandal, was something that we already knew. It wasn't really new to those of us in the know. It, you know, and it just, again, I think the fact that it was Oprah's book club choice, it really propelled it into the spotlight even more. And it was just, Dignidad Literaria is a movement that was definitely saying, you know, enough is enough. And we're going to really push back, and we're going to be really loud here, and loud and informative. And I think one of the things we said the day of Antioch is, like, you know, we had the panel that we had at Antioch was amazing. It was standing room only. It was inspirational if you were there in that room. But the concern is, like, don't let the movement die. Like, don't let this be the only thing we do, right? Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep pushing this conversation. Let's keep reminding the big publishers that we're here. Yeah. And not to seek for their validation. That's another issue too. Like, I'm not asking for your validation. I'm not asking for Penguin to be like, oh yeah, your voice does matter. I don't give a fuck about that. But, and I don't think any of us do, but it's just really to keep pushing the conversation forward. I think movements somewhat die down after a while, after the hype is up and after, like, they stop trending. But I think it's important that we keep the conversation going, because this shit is old. This shit is not new, and it's not going to die out anytime soon. You got to keep talking about the muted voices that happens in publishing. The fact that we're not invited to the table as editors or assistant editors, we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking to an actor recently, Ileana Carter. She was, you know, who's a Salvadoran background. You know, I'm Mexican, Puerto Rican, but together our collective community, right, of brown people with Spanish last names, right? We're kind of like the least represented, given our numbers, in this country, in film, television, press, etc. Any form of, like, telling your story, right? So we suffered this thing of these twin kind of evils of misrepresentation and underrepresentation. Right. And it seems like so much when we're trying to fight that underrepresentation, we allow ourselves to be caught up in the misrepresentation. We're just like, something's better than nothing kind of attitude, right? Not you and me, but I mean, like, you know, yeah. It happens. So how do we fight this simultaneously? Simultaneously fight the misrepresentation and the underrepresentation? Well,
it's exhausting. You know, let's just be honest. Fighting exhausts us, right? Like, I know that I've been politically active. You know, again, college definitely pushed me in that realm, and I haven't stopped in my own way. It is exhausting. It is tiring. For me, and again, it may sound cheesy, but I have kids, you know? So for me as a mom, the way that I keep fighting or keep pushing forward is that, you know, teaching my kids about the misrepresentation and the underrepresentation, and teaching them that this shit does happen. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And that when we want things to, and again, when you want to create a space, you're going to have to probably do a lot of legwork. And if you really want it bad enough, you're just going to have to keep pushing forward. I do remember the Toni Morrison quote, and I keep telling my kids this too. When one of us gets to a certain space, our job is not to push the other people down. It's to bring the other person in. And I think that's so true. Like if if I'm, with La Palabra, if I'm given the opportunity to host my own reading series, fuck yeah, I'm going to invite you. And again, I expect the reciprocity from other people. It is exhausting, Matt, though. It is true. Fighting, if you think about it, just fighting, period, is going to exhaust you mentally, emotionally, physically. And I think for me, just when I have to kind of regroup and recalibrate, I look at my kids, I try to really teach them. When I was doing the whole Literaria stuff with Sochi and trying to put that panel together in 1 week, the hustle of doing that in 1 week with her, my kids were right in the forefront. Like, I did not hide that from my kids. They saw me teach, hustle, and be on the phone, and they were saying, "What are you working on?" And I'm like, "I'm protesting a book." And right away they were like, "Okay, well, what do you need from us?" And I'm like, "Well, I gotta go. Here's some pizza. I gotta go do something, and then I'll be back later on tonight." And the kids being around for that and me not shunning or hiding that from them, I think I'm securing a future for myself when I can't keep fighting anymore, that they're going to keep the fight for me. I know it sounds cheesy, but I do think that that's one of the ways that at least I can combat it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, remembering why we're doing it. I mean, I think that's really important.
Right.
So you're talking about your children. I know you refer to them as your revolutionaries. Can you speak a little bit to not your children, but you are also, in addition to being a poet and a host, a writer of your own. You write of your own poetry, a host that platforms other writers. You're also a teacher. You also taught poetry. Mm-hmm. So, what is your approach to teaching poetry, and how does it differ from the notorious racist James Tate?
Well, I love it. I love the fact that you do that. The difference is that I teach writing, I teach poetry, but I also teach like all facets of it, right? I teach composition writing. And one of the things that I keep stressing to my middle schoolers is education is power. The second that they take education away from you, any form of education, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like university, college, or anything, but the minute they take away books from you, right? Or the ability to self-educate, right? That's someone trying to oppress you, right? Because again, when you educate yourself, there is power there. I'm actually in the middle of having the discussion right now with them about the importance of documenting historical events. And again, why do we do that? Like, why do we need to be writers? Why is it that when political movements happen, that they go for the artists first? That's just a fact. Look at our history. What happens the second when you have coups d'etats and you have revolutions happening in countries? You go for your artists. You pluck your journalists, right? You kill them first. You take away your poets. I mean, Pablo Neruda, going back to him, he was in exile because he cannot go back to his own home country, because as much as all of us know him for his love poems, which is great. Again, people know him from those, I'm sure many people have chosen his poetry for weddings. He was a political poet. Neruda was a political poet who was not welcomed in his country after a while. He was in exile. And so I always try to teach my middle schoolers the importance of being a writer in an era where we're so technologically dependent, right? That we're on our phones, we're texting, we're liking, we're thumbs upping, whatever. We're doing all the things. We're doing these things, and but again, going back to the core of communication, the written form, and how important that is. That for me is different than James Tate. I try to give my kids are 12 years old to 14. And I try to give them a space where they have a voice, and that their voice is going to be and truly respected. I keep telling them all the time, I say, hey, we're going to dissect this novel, and I need you to write this essay. Please understand that I do not need to agree with you. Okay, you and I can respectfully disagree on what we think the trajectory or the development of this character is. We can completely disagree on this on an intellectual level or on a literary level. However, if you come to the table and you present your argument and you have all this evidence and you present your case in a certain way where I'm like, you know what, I don't agree with you, but I can't fault you on how well crafted this argument is and how well you wrote it. I'm still going to give you an A. I just don't have to agree with you. And I think the second that my students hear that, there's a little bit of an ease in the room where I'm like, okay, so you're not asking for us to regurgitate what you say. I'm like, no, I'm not. You don't have to agree with me.
Yeah.
And when I'm teaching you, I'm just giving you my opinion about it. And that's it. And then eventually I need you to come to your own conclusion. Mm-hmm. But the key factor is like, how do you then formulate that conclusion, and how do you, and that's my job. My job is to help you put that together.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because not funny. It's so horrible. In the struggle for ethnic studies, there's this constant question of, we really want to incorporate these communities where they have not been, but we must make sure that we don't lose any of the rigor. And this word rigor appears constantly, right? And so, when listening to your tales of the lazy and notorious racist James Tate, to hear just like how not rigorous often people are when they can just ride upon the fame they've gained through their notorious racism. I mean, if you Google this guy, he's like, there's like a young him and there's like a sheriff standing. There's like a sheriff standing over his shoulder, something like that. Like, I'm proud of you, my boy. Like, write them poems. So like, this guy is a terrible person who etched himself into the annals of history. But he was well regarded. Anyhow, yeah. But it's a horrible thing here. It's a horrible thing that the question of our rigor, the question of our intelligence, the question, we are questioned as students, we are questioned as teachers, we are questioned as workshop leaders, we are questioned constantly for that our work is actually demanding, that what's actually on the page is actually there. Yeah. And if it is there, how it appeared there is a mystery, right? So can you speak a little bit to your own work practices and then advice you have for writers?
My practice is, like I said a few seconds ago, I'm a producer and a consumer. So I do believe in the consumption of writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's fiction. Like, I do believe that it's important to read whatever you can get your hands on, and when you can get your hands on it, right? Like, I get it that sometimes we do not have the ability or the time to sit and read a book, and that's fine. Like, I'm trying to finish Things Fall Apart right now. I've never read this book. I'm so late in the game, but I'm trying to get through it. But I think that, consuming, if you can't produce at the time, I think if for some reason, if you feel that the well is dry and you feel like you can't write anything or nothing's coming to you, then take that opportunity to consume whatever you can get your hands on. And again, in an age of technology, so many books are readily available to us, right? Like as PDFs at this point, right? It's public domain. A lot of stuff is public domain now. So we can get access to like some essays and whatever it is that you desire. Or you can definitely read the work of fiction that we call politics these days. And, I think that if you read Fox News, it's all fiction. And it's a great fictional story that's happening. But I do believe that for me, my own process is when I'm not, like right now, I'm not writing, I'm not producing, I haven't written anything in a long time, but I'm taking this opportunity to read. I'm taking this opportunity to read a chapter a day, if I can, of Things Fall Apart. Like, I'm also trying to be like reasonable with myself. Like, I got a lot of shit going on. I got kids, I'm teaching long distance. There's a pandemic going on. There's a lot of stuff. So I'm trying to be reasonable with myself and gentle and being like, okay, I'm going to read a chapter and then I'll finish it by the end of the month. I'm sure I will. If I'm not writing, I can be reading.
Yeah.
So I think that's the advice I can give right now to people, is that, and also be gentle. I think we're very hard on ourselves, Matt. I think that a lot of us feel like we're not keeping up with each other. And I suffer from that too when I see my friends, publishing or, getting a fellowship or a residency or amazing opportunities. I'm so happy for them, but at the same time, I'm like, shit, I'm a slacker. I'm not doing enough. But then I have to remind myself that I'm like, you know what? You're doing all these other things at the same time. And it all happens in waves. And right now, the wave is happening for him or her. And the best thing I can do right now is to be his or her cheerleader and repost or buy their book or be like and be their megaphone for their work. And so I think supporting each other is extremely important. Mm-hmm. When I'm not here, I always tell the female writers that I'm friends with, I'm like, girl, I'm not here to step on your toes. I'm here to fix your crown. I'm here to fix your crown. I'm not here to take it down. I'm not here to knock it off. I'm here to fix it for you and to elevate you. Again, I even say this to my compadres. I'm like, I'm not a big fan of the jealousy and the competitive nature of this. I don't buy into it. I really don't. I hate when I see it with each other, and I'm like, why are we doing this? Why? We just literally talked about it. There's not that many of us at the table. There's not that many of us in this industry. Why the fuck are we going down the road of being mean to one another or knocking each other down? There's not a lot of us to begin with. We don't have time for that shit. So I think if you're starting off in this world, collaboration, supporting one another is extremely important. I think we need to be supportive. I'm not saying we have to like each other though.
I get it. I mean, I feel that deeply. Like there are people that you really love that you will never work with because
right.
And there are people you can't stand that you have to work with.
Right. And and I know many writers that I personally cannot stand as a human being. Yeah. Right. I'm just like, oh, I'm never having dinner with this person. I'm never going to have drinks with this person. This is not going to happen. However, if I have the ability and the financial ability to buy their new book, right? I'll do that. I can separate the work from the person though. I can do that. And I have many books on my shelf where I'm like, this is a damn good book. The person, not so much, right? But the work is amazing. And we need to, again, the big publishing world of the industry, again, the ones, the Macmillans of the world are not going to really open the doors for us so much. So we have to really be there for each other.
I really believe that actually. That was kind of my take on the whole thing is that we need our own presses and we need networks of presses. We need to have whatever. So to Tia Chucha's Flower Song books. Up north there's Nomadic Press. There's Swimming with Elephants in out of New Mexico, and there are a number of presses. I mean that we need to really support and highlight. I'm with Flower Song, but I'm very interested in promoting all authors from these other presses, and so we can really create that network and be supporting each other, like you're saying, because we need to support each other as individual poets, like Matt supports Luivette supports Matt, all that.
Of course.
But we need to support presses too, like that. We need to support organizations, entities, whole things in general. I mean, and you can simultaneously do that by buying the person's book from that press, but having that in mind to support these organizations that are ours, and in 20, 30 years time, I'm not saying they can compete with Penguin, but they can be something worth having.
Right.
And they already are, but I mean, they could be bigger than they are.
Right. They could be forces. And the only reason, and unfortunately, a lot of presses fold because they don't have the backing, right? They just can't keep putting things out there. They don't have the enough human power to put it out there. But again, if we're not supporting them, like you said, then they're not going to stick around much longer, right? They'll die out. Like I think there was one press it's called Kitchen Table Press, and I think that was the publishing company that first put out Loving in the War Years by Sherry Moraga. I think that they were the ones that did it. I'm not mistaken. I think that was and I know Kitchen Table Press, some of the first Latino writers that I remember Elena talking about them, and it didn't survive, right? I mean, in my mind, I'm like, man, what would have it been like if Kitchen Table Press was still around to this day, right? If And I know that they started in the 70s, and this is obviously before the internet. So yeah, they're not going to stick around unless we support them.
Yeah. So what is next on the horizon? Are you working on a manuscript? Do you have a manuscript ready to go?
I do. It's called Promises or Coffee. And I've been submitting it. I've been working on it for a few years now and tinkering with it and revising it. And I'm at the point where I feel like it's done. And I've been submitting it to different contests and different spaces. And now it's just another waiting game, right? You submit, you wait, you get rejected. You know, you go back and forth. You know, I talked to Luis about it, and Luis is a super nice, amazing person, and he's such a dad in that way, where he's like, you know, he says Tia Chucha Press is a small independent press, and he's like, I think you're ready for something middle ground. I think you're at a space where you should be with someone bigger. So I'm trying to try out for bigger presses right now, but again, it's super competitive, and I'm seeing that, and it doesn't. And I try, and I think you know this too. You try not to take the rejections personal, and be like, oh, I suck as a writer. I'm horrible. It's nothing about you. It's just, again, how many poetry books can a press actually put out? And poetry is low in the totem pole. Right. So compared to like YA or fiction. So I have it out. I have it. I'm putting it out there in the universe, and I believe in my work. And I know that as long as I keep believing in it, and other people do as well, I know it's going to find a home, and it's going to find the right home.
Well, I hope you find one of those, you know, larger places with a big public infrastructure to get you out there. If you get frustrated doing that, let's talk, because I know a guy.
You know a guy who knows a guy?
No, I know the guy, and I kind of am the Cali guy, but I don't want to. I kind of try to hide that fact, you know. But
okay, I appreciate that. I do. I really do. I mean, I do. So let me know. But yeah, we'll talk.
All right. Any final words of advice for people? You have this wonderful poem that you wrote to yourself as at like 15 and at 20, and you know. So what advice do you have to those to people who are now where you once were, and really want to write and be?
I would say also network with you said networking a few minutes ago. I think also networking with mentors, right? Like finding, I think one of the things, I mean, I had Martine, which is great, but that was completely by chance, right? Like which is a great chance again, but being one of the very few people in my MFA program was tough. So it would have been great to have had a Latino writer, a Latina poet who was just maybe a little bit older than I was, just a little bit, to just kind of guide me through this life. And I think that with the internet now and all this ability with social media, I think it's a little easier to find a mentor. So if you're new to the scene of poetry or fiction, I do think it behooves you to try to find a mentor, someone who can guide you through the process. And because if not, it's brutal. Like, you do take the rejection seriously. You do think that you're a shitty writer, you know. And I mean, I wouldn't want some young Latina, specifically Puerto Rican poet to bow out from this scene merely because she got rejected a couple of times, right? I wouldn't want that. I would want to tell her, like, listen, that's just one editor's, you know, perspective. You know, and sometimes those editors are right. Maybe your poem does need to be revised one more time, but don't take that as that you're a bad writer. But again, having someone to talk you through those moments, I didn't have that. I mean, I did and I didn't at the same time, but I would have killed it to have a female talk to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great advice. That's great advice. But there are some questions in the it's kind of funny because you ask someone to give their advice and they say like they say that you know, these really profound things, and then when you're kind of like supposed to be moving the conversation, you don't know what to say because you're like like, oh, that's a complete statement. But so we have questions. Sonia Gutierrez asks, Luivette, who is your favorite Latinx writer?
Living or dead? That's a good one. Pat, someone who.
Let's do both.
Okay, so yeah, I'm like living or dead because you could go either way with this one. For me, hands down, Judith Ortiz Cofer. is one of my favorite Latina writers who passed away, I think about this point 3 years ago. She was a Puerto Rican poet, essayist, fiction writer. I don't think a lot of people know enough about her. And she was writing about, I mean, I love her work. It's her book, her collection of poetry is called Latin Deli. And she just had some amazing, well-crafted poems in my perspective. They were bilingual. They had this feminism about them too, like the strong empowerment of the woman. And so Judith Ortiz Cofer, I never got a chance to meet her. She passed away from cancer. And she was still really young when she passed away in my eyes. And so I think for me, she's one of my favorite go-tos for sure. Right now, living, I'm gonna say, yeah, you know, I fangirl over my own friends. You know, I have amazing network of women. I'm gonna talk about the women, and I mean, I love Xochitl. Xochitl's one of my favorite people, and I have the opportunity to read her work, or sometimes even like a draft of her work, and I'm like always taken aback that I can just send her something and she can send me something. So I love Xochitl Julissa Bermejo's work, and she's definitely somebody right now that I like rereading every so often.
Yeah. Well, Luivette, I really thank you for your time. I know we had a closing. You had a really great thing to say, and then questions, and but I really want to commend you for the work you've done, and for thank you for sharing so much of this history. It's really been a great hour and some change talking about both the things came before you, things you were involved in, the things that you made happen in the world, and I really look forward to all the things that will happen in the future.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you have to, I'm trying to put together a online virtual poetry show. I don't know if you listen to the Wu-Tang Clan at all.
You doing this again?
I never did it. So like,
okay.
I never did it. So like, I'm like, fuck it. Like, we're in this fucking quarantine, God knows how long. So I want to do a virtual poetry reading, and I want it to be a golden shovel for the Wu-Tang Clan. So
do you have a Facebook page plug or anything like that we can drop?
Not yet. Like literally, I just got the bug to do this like 24 hours ago, and I said, hey, anybody down? So I want East Coast poets and West Coast poets. So ideally, I want as many poets as they are in the clan. Mm-hmm. So we actually embody the clan as best as possible. And you pick up, you got to pick your one entrance song that you want to come into.
Yeah.
And I'm actually trying to see if I can get an actual DJ to be DJing the entrance music, because I'm not going to try to do that. But if you're down, I would love it.
Well, if you create one of those like little event pages, whatever, we'll drop it in the link, or you can just describe it in the thread and what to do next. So,
all right.
Thank you so much. That's it.
All right. Bye, Matt.
Don't go.